Hi, my name is Selena Coyle and I am a project artist with ArtsCare, and today I'm going to show you how to do a 3D technique, a sculpting technique, and we're going to use cacti as our inspiration. So this technique can be used for many sculptures, rocket ships, other things that you want to do three-dimensionally, but today we're going to use the cactus as our inspiration. So you could do some drawing from this beforehand, but I'm going to give you a simple shape that you can follow. Now ideally this project would be could be done in one session, but ideally you would maybe want to spread it out over a couple of sessions just so you weren't rushing it and you could take your time with each step. But it could be done over one, but we'll see how we get on today and you can see how it fits with your schedule. So the materials you're going to need are, to begin with, we need the body of our cactus. So I'm going to use today I'm going to make a smaller one and use a tin can, but you can also use for a larger one, and I do have an example I can show you later where I've used a Pringles tin, but again the Pringles tins come smaller, so you could use one of those. You may want to, if you've got any tubing around from posters or insides of toilet rolls are a bit flimsy, so you want this to be able to stand up, and this is why the tin can is great, because it will stand up of its own volition and it won't fall over. The insides of toilet roll might. The other materials, you're going to need some newspaper, masking tape, very important. We're going to use this plaster strip that comes in a roll, and you can just cut it into strips, and we're going to need them, say, a couple of centimeters wide is perfect, and you can prep that beforehand, get this all ready. Then we're going to use some Mod Podge or some PVA glue, it's up to you, whatever you have. We're going to use some tissue paper. There's two ways we can get them green: with tissue paper, which gives a really nice effect, or you can use some acrylic paint. And then for some detail, we're going to be using a glue gun. If necessary, you might need an adult for some adult supervision or for some help. It's not necessary, you can use other glue, but a glue gun is fast. So some glue sticks. And finally some buttons for some little detail that we can add at the very end. So that's everything. So we'll take this step by step and see how we get on. So the first step is we're going to get the structure of the cactus. And you're going to use your newspaper. You're going to take your newspaper and scrunch it up. First thing we're going to do is we're going to round up the top of this head. So really don't worry too much about this, doesn't have to be perfect, and you may want to do this as a pair so that you can help. Extra pair of hands is always useful in this, or if you're doing them individually, just take your time. So a piece of tape it on. Remember, this is all going to be covered up, so you don't need to be too precious about what it looks like, as long as it's holding it securely in place. And you don't need to use too much masking tape because you're going to use quite a lot anyway, but don't worry about it being too perfect with lots and lots of masking tape on it. So we've got a nice rounded top. Now we want our two little arms coming out, and they are literally going to be like little cigar shapes. So I'm going to show you how to do one, and then you can see in the next step how it all comes together. So there's just one thing you have to be aware of when you're making your shape. So you're creating like a little cigar shape. So you can take a piece of newspaper just to hold it in place, like little sausages. And again, they don't have to be perfect, they just have to be, you can see that kind of shape. Now the important part I am going to show you is that when you attach this on, that it needs to be well enough attached, because you don't want it coming off. So take a long piece of tape, I'm going to show you, and attach it to the top all the way down and round, and then make sure it's well attached. It'll still fall off, or it could still fall off, but at least we've got it started. We'll do one from the inside now. So start up here, hold it up in shape, bring it down. So we want to get it to a point where it's kind of holding its shape. Remember, we will be putting plaster of Paris over this, and that's when it'll get really sturdy and rock hard and it will not budge. But for now we want to get it so that it's somewhat holding it in that shape. So there's one. I'm going to do the other one, and you can see me when it's finished. We'll have two arms coming out the other side. That one there, it's a little flimsy, but don't worry, as long as it's in there and it's staying upright. And we'll do a second one here. So we've done our shaping. So we've shaped our tin can with its top and its two arms using the masking tape, and it's still a little bit fragile, but that's okay. It's holding its shape. It's the shape I want it to be. So now we're going to use these plaster strips, and as I said, you can get this online. It comes in rolls, or the works. There's various places where you can buy this. So plaster strips, it's the same as the stuff that is used in the hospital to bandage your arms, so it's very safe. And what you do want to be very careful of though is that you keep it dry. So I've got a little container here, dry space, so that it's not getting wet. So don't have it on the table where it can get wet, because it'll start, what happens is as soon as the water hits this, there's a chemical reaction. It starts to activate the gypsum, the plaster, and that's then what will start going hard from there on in. So we want to move quite quickly. So I have this all already cut, and as I showed you earlier, it's very simple to cut into strips. Have it done and prepped beforehand. You're going to need some clean water, cold water, not warm. The warmer the water, the faster the plaster will start setting up. So cold water's fine. And you can keep it to the side a little. We want to keep this plaster. It's really important that this stays dry, or you'll ruin all of these strips. So got your model. And again, this could be a model of any other shape, a rocket ship, anything, an animal, various things that you could model using this technique of the newspaper and plastic and masking tape. And then that's your structure, your base. So now you're going to take a plaster strip, dip it in the water. And again, if you want to use gloves at this point, this is all very safe, but it can be quite drying in your hands. I'm not going to bother because this is going to be quite quick. So you can hear it almost even starts to crackle and bubble. So we're going to start with the plaster strips. And I want to show you, you're going to put it on, and straight away it'll start becoming kind of creamy. And there's like a fabric that the plaster is soaked in. And that will become very flexible, and that's why it's made that way, so that it can fit around broken arms and broken limbs. So I'm going to just piece by piece, and you can overlap it, but you want to smooth it until it goes nice and smooth. And because the material is very flexible, it will take the shape, it'll go into nooks and crannies. At this point, you do want to take your time. There's no point rushing this. Sometimes I've done this project with a lot of grips, and it just depends. Sometimes people want to rush through this stage, but really, this is when just a little bit of patience, because you want to smooth it out until all those holes have gone, and you've got a really nice, because the surface you give now is the surface you're going to have for painting. So I'm going to keep going, one strip at a time. Try and not get your hands too wet. As I say, keep the water away from the dry plaster. Again, this is where working in partnership can sometimes be really useful, because one person can deal with the wet things, the wet side of things, and the other person can be smoothing it off, and there's only one person getting their hands wet or with plaster on them. So you can see, because the material is flexible, it'll smoosh in around, very technical terms here, around your shape. So again, take your time, get it nice and smooth. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to cover this entire shape, and you can see it's starting to take, you're getting one uniform white shape. So I'm going to continue this, and at the next step we'll have this completely covered in white. It'll start going hard. You'll be amazed, especially on a warm summer's day. And today it's quite warm, quite mild. It'll get hard really, really quite quickly. And this is where you could do this in one session, but ideally, and if you were doing it any other time of the year, you would want to leave this to harden overnight. So you're going to leave me for now. I'm going to cover this completely with the plaster. And again, when you're coming around here, you're going to wrap them around. Take your time, and we'll see where we go from there. You've finished with your plaster, you've covered it completely, and as you can see, it's already starting to go hard, so it does not take very long. So you kind of have to move fast, but at the same time take your time to get a nice smooth surface. So you want to get all of the bubbles, you'll see little holes in the material, try and smooth over it as much as you can. Now I'm going to set this one aside because it's best to let this completely dry. Now if you were doing this in one session, you could use a hairdryer, or if you had a heater available to sit it on, but a hairdryer just to get it, because it still feels damp and cold, so you know it's still a little bit of damp when you can feel it cold. So ideally you could leave it overnight and it would be dry and pure white by the morning. But again, if you wanted to speed up that process, use a hairdryer. Now I'm going to use one I did last night. So as you can see, I used the Pringles tin, so it's a little bit taller, but it can stand up on its own. I think it looks pretty good. It's a good shape. So I'm going to show you these are the kind of the latter stages now, where I'm going to show you how to put some texture on with a glue gun if you want to. If you don't want to use a glue gun, you can bypass this stage, but I just wanted to show you how you can use it to a really good effect. And then we're going to put some color on this. So the other thing before I move on I wanted to talk about was when you use plaster, the one thing that is a cardinal rule when you use plaster is that you do not put any plaster, wet or dry, down the sink. If you put it down the sink, what plaster does naturally is it goes rock hard. So it'll go rock hard in your S-bend and you'll block your drain. So do not put plaster down the sink. So if your hands have got plaster on them, if you've worn gloves, great, you can take them off, throw them away. If your hands are plastered, the old trusty wipes or wet kitchen roll, just give yourself a bit of a wipe down, take the plaster off that way. If you were making up plaster to cast something and you had a bowl of plaster, the temptation to wash it down the sink, you really have to deny that temptation. You have to go to your bin and get as much of the wet plaster into the bin and then wipe out a container with paper towel. Get it as clean as you can with paper towel over a bin, and then you can rinse it. So I've wiped down my hands. I'm just going to give them a dry. You can see if it gets on your clothes, plaster gets on your clothes, it's actually it's fine. Wait till it dries and just dust it off, and it'll dust off like talcum powder. So we're at the stage where we want to put some texture on this. I'm going to show you a way using a glue gun safely. And again, an adult may need to do this for you. Depends who's working on the project. But to give it, like sometimes cactus have a line. They kind of have ridges on them. So using the glue gun, just carefully apply a stripe effectively of glue from top to bottom. So you can see that, and when that hardens you'll get a ridge, and then when you paint or tissue paper over, I think you can probably see the other side where I have done it, getting a sneak preview. It's a really effective way of getting a texture to increase its cactus-like appearance. So I'm just going to put one more down this side. So take your time You want it to be nice and slow, a steady line, as steady as you can. And again, be very careful with the glue gun. Hot glue on skin is very sore, so let's try not to do that. As you can see, I'm staying well away from where the hot glue is. And of course I'm running out of glue sticks, so I'm just going to pop another one in here to get it started. Glue guns can be such a help or such a hindrance sometimes. So we've got the 3 lines at the front. I'm just going to quickly put a few lines up each of these arms, and then we'll continue with getting some colour on this and getting it finished up. Okay? So if you've used the glue gun to put some texture, so we now have some ridges down the arms of this and down the body. So now we're going to put some colour. Now if you want, you can, as I say, paint this with acrylic paint. You could paint it all in one colour of green and then come back in and paint the ridges, highlight those with a different colour of green. But I'm going to show you a way which I think is much more effective to get a really nice variegated, different colours of green onto your cactus, so it looks a little bit more animated, give it more depth. And because we're using Mod Podge or PVA glue, when it dries overnight, it'll be nice and shiny. It'll be like a hard, tough varnish on it, so it'll give a nice protective coat. So just quickly, the first thing you're going to do, we'll start with one arm. You're going to coat the entire arm. I don't know what the appendage of a cactus is called, but for now we'll just call it an arm. Completely with the Mod Podge, as I'm using, or PVA glue if you're using PVA glue. Give it a good coating. Now we're going to use tissue paper for this. So this comes in a pack. Again, I bought it at the range here in Derry, and I'm sure there's multiple ranges around and other places you can get multi-packs of tissue paper, because ideally you want a few different colours of green. So you can see there's actually 3 colours of green here. When you get them, you want to cut them up into largish pieces, and they don't have to be uniform. They can be rectangles, squares, it doesn't matter, it's up to you. The important thing is that you separate them and that you don't just cut them up and leave them there. You need to separate them into single sheets. I can't stress this enough, because if you start putting double layers on, it starts to get very messy. So take a bit of time, give yourself a pile of tissue paper ready to go. I've coated it with 1 layer, and now, because this can get very messy if you start using your fingers, so try and use the paintbrush to lift the tissue paper, and then it should kind of stick to the arm that we have already pasted with some Mod Podge. And I'm going to mix this up and use some smaller pieces and not use large pieces all over. So I'm going to uncover some of these smaller pieces here, so we get a real mix of colours. And you'll see it looks a little bit messy. It's the white, obviously the Mod Podge looks white over it, like white paint, but that will go away by tomorrow. That'll be nice and shiny. In fact, I'll show you what the final effect looks like. And we want to cover, so that is the 3 colours I've put on there of the green. So you're getting this really nice mix that would be very difficult to achieve by painting it. Kind of gives it a camouflage sort of approach effect once it's finished. So keep lifting them. We don't want to see, the goal is you don't want to see any white at all. So I'm going to spend the time, taking my time to cover this, because as I say, if you start lifting these and putting them on trying to put it on with your fingers, it's very difficult. It starts to get really messy. Your fingers start sticking to everything. You start lifting bits off. So if you can, this technique that I'm showing you, where we coated it first of all with 1 layer, you're using the paintbrush that's got glue on it to lift them on, place them on. They should stick down because there's a layer of glue, of PVA or Mod Podge there. And then cover them up, the last bits. I don't want to see any white at all. That's the goal. You don't need to do multiple layers. Really, there isn't really much point in that. Once you've covered the white, all the white areas, and you can't see white through it, that should be fine. You don't want to overwork the tissue paper either with the paintbrush. If you start to overwork it, and I've done it a little bit, it starts to lift the tissue paper. So once it's smoothed down, and you'll see it starts to take the shape of the ridges. So the ridges, they're just a slight detail. Have I any white anywhere? Maybe a little bit in under here. Again, I'm just going to put another layer. Don't be afraid of using, you can't use too much PVA glue or Mod Podge. You can use too little, but you can't use too much. Even if you go over work you've already done, it'll just varnish it. So there we go. I think we've covered that arm completely in white. So I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of the body, and then we'll have a look at it. So I finished coating this side completely in Mod Podge first, then tissue paper, and then another final coating of Mod Podge or PVA glue. I said that you only needed one layer. You do when in this process where we've used plaster of Paris because it's a white base. There are projects that I've done in the past where we've just used newspaper and masking tape to create a shape, and we have done several layers of the Mod Podge and tissue paper to make it really tough because they were for display. and a classroom tool, so we wanted to have a really tough shell. But for this, because we have the plaster of Paris, it gives it the hard shell, so one layer is fine. And this, at this point, this is when you would need to leave it overnight. It's not really going to dry, and I don't know if I would really encourage you to use a hairdryer to speed that up. You could try and see, but usually I leave it overnight because I just want to put it aside, because if I start touching this now, the tissue paper has a tendency to come off on your hands, and you do not want that. So I would at this stage put it aside, leave it overnight, and come back to it for another session. So I just want to show you by the trick of the fact I did one last night how it ends up. So you end up with this really nice hard shell. It's got a nice hard varnish to it. You can see the ridges are here, but I decided, I have this little salt and pepper set. I love my salt and pepper set. And you can see that it has the little indentations and the little bumps. And I thought I would mimic that by using, I have a collection of I just happen to have a collection of green buttons. So I've covered this with buttons, and I think it's really effective. So this would be the finished item. And just to really quickly show you, I'm going to put the last few buttons on. Again, using the glue gun. Again, get an adult to help you if you're not of an age where you feel comfortable, or if you just are of an age and you still feel uncomfortable using a glue gun, use a different type of glue, a cold glue if you want. It just makes it very easy to and quick. I suppose it's expediency really. It makes it quite quick, and as long as you don't touch, what you'll end up with what everyone who's used a glue gun knows. You'll end up with lots of little strings, but we can clear those away afterwards. I'm not so worried about those. They're like spider webs, but we'll just tear them away once we're completely finished. So I just have 3 more here, and I made little markers just with a little punch, like a needle, like a big embroidery needle, a big thick needle. I just punch, just really to give me a placement. But again, you could just do it by eye. You wouldn't really need to, you don't need to do that. You can just start applying them and go hell for the leather to get it covered. As many as you want. I've put quite a lot on here, and obviously when the other side dries I'll put some more, but I think that is really effective. I love it. So it's added to my collection of cacti that I'm now building up. So that is that one. And as you can see, these are ones I've made in other projects with other groups. This one has a little bit of a roll from, I explained earlier, from like a poster. It's kind of tough, not toilet roll, it's harder than that. And that's just to enable it to not fall down inside. You could fill this with stones so you don't see the roll inside, but in this case you don't really see it, so I'm not so worried. So again, from one we made previous, you could glue this up inside so it's got somewhere to, gives it a bit of stability if you want to put it, or inside a little terracotta pot that you could also decorate as another project. You can add additional little things, like these are little felt balls, because sometimes cacti have little flowers, so you could attach any brightly little colored things that you wanted to attach to give the illusion, or just that kind of idea that there's little flowers on the cactus. So that's it. That's the project finished. I think it's really effective, and it's something that's a little bit addictive. I love, as I say, I'm creating a little collection of them. It's a project I love to do with all age groups and all abilities. I think everyone can do it. There's things that you may want to change, not use the glue gun, etc. But in general, I think it's really a fun project and a great project for somewhere that needs brightening up. So maybe somewhere like a hospital where they can't have fresh flowers. This would be a great idea to decorate a ward with cacti that will never die. We can't kill them, which is also a plus. But I've done it in a day centre, and they have a whole line of them on the windowsill, and they love their cacti. So happy making.